I'm almost scared to say this, but there actually are a lot of reasons why combat sports are terrible for self-defense. Right now, a bunch of fat guys with ponytails are like, duh, we've been telling you that. And all the MMA gym bros are like, what the hell, Mike? I thought you were with us, man. You even made a video saying that MMA is self-defense. Reality-based self-defense guys and dudes who train for the street will always draw this large distinction between sport and street. And the Muay Thai and MMA fighters, boxers, wrestlers, and BJJ players will always say that there's not really much difference. The truth is there is a difference, it's just not as big as the neckbeards on the martial arts subreddit would have you believe. The biggest problem with the argument of boxing, wrestling, MMA, BJJ being bad for self-defense is you're trying to convince a bunch of guys that could kick your ass that what they're doing is not the correct way to do things. But there are a ton of things that combat sports doesn't cover that are important for the streets. And no, I'm not talking about groin strikes, eye gouging, and biting. I've talked about all those things in the past. The things that I'm talking about are some things that you might have never even thought of, and I'll give you the first example which should explain exactly what I mean. My son is a talented martial artist. He's a tough dude. He spars with professional fighters, amateur fighters, grown men all the time. But he does it all without a sound, without a whimper, without a yell, without making a noise or even showing any emotion in his face. My biggest fear is that he is attacked or getting hurt or in trouble, and he will go out on his shield just as he spars, just as he trains, and just as he fights, without a word. Fighters don't practice yelling out for help or trying to draw attention to themselves. In fact, they practice not making noise, because if you cry out in pain, that's a submission. And you might think that, oh, well, but if it were a real encounter and I did need help or I was being attacked, I would yell for help then, or I would draw attention to myself then. But you have not practiced that, MMA gym bro. If you've not practiced it, what are the chances that you're actually going to do it under stress? In fact, when you say that, well, if it was real, I really would, you sound like the guys who are too deadly to spar and have never actually practiced any of the things that they plan on doing in the street. What do you think about that? Like, have you ever thought about that? When you say training for the street, what are you really talking about? Because it's not this. And speaking of the street, like, do you ever train in your regular clothes? Do you ever train in jeans? Like, if you wear jeans, most jeans, you can't hardly pick your leg up. If like throwing front snap kicks to the face is a part of what you do, have you ever tried it in your jeans? Now, I'm not saying you have to wear clothes that let you throw your best techniques, right? But you have to know whether or not you can. And speaking of your clothes and the streets, what about weapons? Their weapons, your weapons. I know a ton of dudes that train with firearms and knives that also train in combat sport related martial arts. I know very few dudes that do both at the same time. We've covered it before, it's mostly because it sucks, but do you know how your weapons slot into your martial arts skill set under pressure? Do you know how your gear works? This video is sponsored by Groove Life. I've got the Groove belt, which is the first belt that I've ever had where it was sturdy enough to carry a concealed carry setup, but not so bulky that I didn't want to use it if I was not carrying a concealed carry setup. Like, if you don't carry a gun, it's still a great belt. It's got these neodymium magnet clasps that it never comes undone. It stretches a little bit. This belt is really good. You set it and then you don't ever have to adjust it. Like, even if you ate a little bit too much or you pooped a lot, you know, it'll still work. I also wear the Groove Life ring because I do crazy stuff. I fight over weapons. I actually train and struggle with guns. I swing kettlebells and lift weights. I climb on shit. So if you need to do all that, you need to be wearing like a silicone ring. Groove Life has the only breathable one. I've always worn a silicone ring. This is the most realistic looking one that I've ever had. Like, it actually looks like metal, and it's the first one that I didn't feel all sweaty underneath. The breathability is a real thing. This is the best one. This is the best one. I was wearing this before they ever sponsored the video. So I'll put a link down to Groove Life in the description below. Make sure you go check them out, get you a Groove belt or Groove ring. And I love doing this. It's very satisfying. I didn't know that this would be as strong as it was, but you have to very deliberate, like you can't do it by accident. You have to very deliberately take it off, but you can get in there fast. Like if you have to pee real bad, or if you have to get your pants off like real quick for other reasons. All these things that I'm saying about training for the street, like have you ever tried rolling in your clothes? Some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu schools do that. And you find out things like your hoodie is a liability, or maybe your belt bunches up or digs into you, or it's uncomfortable or whatever, or maybe your weapons fall out of their holsters. Some people have done that, but it's about the amount of thought and intention that's put into it. It just occurred to me, I threw this spin kick kind of as a joke, and some 5'11" pants guy is gonna be like, "Oh, you never kick in a street fight, unsubscribed," or whatever. Yeah, you should kick in a street fight, but you should also know how well you can kick or how high you can kick. In fact, let's talk about soccer kicks and head stomps. Let's talk about headbutts. Let's talk about all these banned techniques. I won't linger too long on groin strikes, eye gouging, biting, because we've covered it in the past, and basically what it amounts to is they weren't banned from combat sports because they end fights reliably. In fact, they were banned because they do not. They'll do a disproportionate amount of damage to the person relative to the impact it'll have on a fight. There were times where that stuff was allowed in Vale Tudo, and that is not what reliably ended fights. You know what did? Punches in the face, getting slammed, choked out, kicks in the head, that sort of stuff. That's when there was no rules. Guess what reliably ends fights in the streets? All that stuff. But about the headbutts and the soccer kicks, because we actually do practice those here in this gym that primarily trains combat athletes. When MMA fighters sprawl and they end up in some position like this, they might have a bad habit of like reaching for legs, because the worst thing that'll happen is a couple of little punches while they're moving, while the guy's trying to get his legs back and not get taken down. They might get little shots in transitional spaces. But what about when a dude posts on a guy's head, stands up, and goes wham? You'll see that a lot, especially when an MMA fighter who's not used to knees or kicks to down opponents goes into an organization where it's allowed. This is a thing, much like how amateurs don't often practice their elbows or their knees, and then when they have their first MMA fight, the crowd has to remind them to do these things. You just have to be reminded to throw the head kick. So we actually practice them here. Obviously not at full force, but basically it's a reminder that if you know how to sprawl, and you know how to defend a takedown, or you know how to get up from bottom, or take someone down, that you can also remember to throw your soccer kick, or stomp their head, or something like that. Just like with the headbutt. If you know how to get inside position, and you know how to clinch and hand fight, and break posture, you can use the headbutt to help you do those things, or even end the fight. The problem is that most of those guys that talk about doing all that stuff don't train the other stuff that will help them get there. They don't know how to wrestle. They don't know how to clinch. They think that stomping someone's head or headbutting them is a guaranteed fight finisher. Basically, you just have some bullets but no gun to shoot them with, because you need a vehicle to carry those techniques to the other person. You need to know how to wrestle, or know how to clinch, or know how to box at least, before you'll ever be able to get your head onto an opponent's face. The real moral of the story, though, is that if you just take a guy who's really good at punching, kicking, slamming, and choking people, and remind him, hey, guns, hey, hoods, hey, other people, that goes a lot farther than taking a guy who's just spent his whole life talking about, I would just do this, or I would just do that, or I would just do this. Oh, God. It hurt more because I didn't do it very hard. I think that made it worse. That was me, yes, kicking myself in the groin. I can do that because I'm wearing this sweet Groove Life belt that's very flexy. It's much easier to teach all those guys who know how to fight some reality-based considerations than it is to teach all the reality-based self-defense dorks how to sprawl and brawl. If you've not practiced and reminded yourself about the opportunities to kick or knee the head of a grounded opponent, you might forget. You might worry about attacking that turtle or passing that guard, and your conditioning and the things you've practiced and done under stress hundreds or thousands of times, that programming will take over. And yes, if you are a pro MMA fighter, you'll probably still win 9 out of 10 street fights. But when the price for losing is so high, you know, a 90% win rate in the cage or ring is great, but a 10% chance of a loss in the street is really bad when we talk about what that actually represents.